When people think about World War II, they often picture American troops storming beaches and winning decisive battles. Hollywood helped build that image. But long before the United States fully entered the war, Britain was already fighting, bleeding, and holding the line. This story is not about denying American bravery, it is about restoring balance to history and understanding who carried the war when the world was close to collapse. In 1939, Britain stood almost alone against Nazi Germany. France fell in weeks. Much of Europe was occupied. The United States was still officially neutral. British soldiers, sailors, and pilots were already fighting a global war, defending sea lanes, protecting colonies, and facing German forces on multiple fronts. Without those early British sacrifices, there would have been no stable platform for later American victories. The Battle of Britain in 1940 was the first major defeat of Hitler's war machine. The Royal Air Force, outnumbered and under constant attack, stopped the German Air Force from gaining control of the skies. This was not a symbolic victory. It directly prevented a full-scale German invasion of Britain. If Britain had fallen, the Atlantic would have become a Nazi-controlled highway, making any future American involvement nearly impossible. At the same time, the British Royal Navy was fighting a brutal, unseen war in the Atlantic. German U-boats were sinking merchant ships at alarming rates. Britain developed convoy systems, radar improvements, and anti-submarine tactics that later protected American troops and supplies. When American soldiers crossed the ocean years later, they did so using systems Britain had already paid for in blood. In North Africa, British forces were fighting the Axis years before American ground troops arrived. Battles against German General Erwin Rommel tested British armor, tactics, and leadership. These early campaigns weakened Axis resources and provided hard-earned lessons that allied commanders later used with American forces. This matters because history often skips the early chapters. When America entered the war after Pearl Harbor, Britain had already absorbed the hardest blows. British industry was bombed, cities burned, and civilians killed. Yet the country kept fighting, not knowing if help would ever come. Behind many famous American wins stood years of British resistance. This series will uncover those overlooked battles, the forgotten sacrifices, and the uncomfortable truth that Britain did much of the fighting when the odds were darkest. For American and Canadian audiences, this perspective is not an attack on national pride. It is a reminder that victory in World War II was built step by step, nation by nation. Britain held the door open while others prepared to enter the fight, understanding that reality makes the Allied victory more impressive, not less. In the next part, we will look at specific battles where British forces carried the main burden. When the United States entered World War II in late 1941, Britain was already deep into a fight for survival. Years of combat had shaped British strategy, hardened its soldiers, and drained its resources. American forces did not walk into a fresh war. They entered one Britain had been holding together under constant pressure. One of the clearest examples is the Battle of the Atlantic. By 1942, Britain had already spent 3 exhausting years fighting German submarines. British scientists improved sonar, depth charges, and convoy tactics through deadly trial and error. These systems later protected American troop transports crossing safely to Europe. In North Africa, British forces carried the main burden long before American troops arrived. From Operation Compass to the early clashes with Rommel's Afrika Korps, Britain fought alone across vast deserts. These battles were brutal, costly, and often ignored in American-focused history books. When American troops finally joined the North African Campaign in 1942, they benefited from British experience. British officers shared intelligence, terrain knowledge, and hard lessons learned the painful way. Early American defeats, such as Kasserine Pass, showed how steep the learning curve still was. Even in Italy, often remembered as an American advance, British forces formed the backbone of early operations. British and Commonwealth troops fought through mountains, rivers, and fortified towns. Progress was slow and bloody, weakening German defenses before larger American forces pushed forward. The Air War tells a similar story. Long before American bombers filled the skies, the Royal Air Force had been striking German industrial targets. British night bombing forced Germany to divert fighters, radar, and anti-aircraft guns away from the Eastern Front and later from American daylight raids. Perhaps the most misunderstood moment is D-Day. While American landings dominate popular culture, Britain planned the invasion years in advance. British intelligence, deception operations, and naval planning made the landings possible. British and Canadian troops secured entire beaches under heavy fire. None of this diminishes American courage. Instead, it shows how layered victory truly was. Britain fought when defeat seemed inevitable. America joined when the path, though still deadly, had been carved open by earlier sacrifice. Understanding this shared effort restores history's missing weight. For American and Canadian viewers, this context matters. It reminds us that freedom was not delivered in one heroic moment. It was earned through years of grinding resistance. Britain absorbed the first blows, learned the hardest lessons, and passed them on. In the next part, we will examine how post-war storytelling, movies, and politics shifted public memory. We will explore how British contributions slowly faded from popular narratives, while American victories took center stage. History did not change. The story told about. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, a new battle quietly began. The battle over memory. Victory needed a story, and stories shape power. Britain emerged from the war exhausted, bankrupt, and dependent on American loans. The United States emerged wealthy, confident, and globally influential. That imbalance soon reshaped how World War II was remembered. Hollywood played a massive role. American films focused on Normandy, heroic charges, and clear victories. British struggles were quieter, longer, and harder to dramatize. Years of endurance do not fit neatly into a 2-hour movie. As American cinema spread worldwide, its version of the war became the version most people knew. Politics mattered too. After the war, America led the rebuilding of Europe through economic aid and military alliances. Britain, once an empire, was forced to dismantle colonies and reduce its global role. Gratitude and dependence subtly shifted attention toward American leadership. Even when earlier survival had depended heavily on British resistance, school textbooks followed the same path. In North America, lessons emphasized Pearl Harbor, D-Day, and the March to Berlin. Britain appeared as a supporting character rather than the nation that stood alone from 1939 to 1941. Over time, repetition hardened perception into accepted truth. Even language reveals the shift. Phrases like, "America saved Europe," became common, while Britain's early sacrifices faded into footnotes. Yet without Britain's refusal to surrender, there would have been no safe base, no Allied invasion, and no eventual liberation of Western Europe. This imbalance does not require rewriting history, only widening the lens. American courage and industrial power were decisive, but they arrived into a war already shaped by British endurance, planning, and loss. Recognizing that truth strengthens Allied unity rather than weakening it. For modern American and Canadian audiences, this matters more than pride. It is about accuracy. It is about honoring those who fought when victory was uncertain. Britain fought when defeat was possible, even likely, and that decision changed the course of history. In the next part, we will break down specific moments where American fame overshadowed British action, from intelligence breakthroughs to command decisions. These are not opinions, but documented facts drawn from wartime records. By examining them closely, the myth of a single savior nation fades. What remains is a clearer picture of cooperation built on sacrifice. World War II was not won by one flag alone. It was won because Britain refused to fall, because America eventually joined, and because allies learned from each other under fire. Remembering the full story does not divide us. It connects us to the reality of how freedom was preserved, one hard decision at a time. That understanding challenges easy legends, but it honors every soldier, pilot, and sailor whose One of the most overlooked British contributions to World War II was intelligence. While battlefield victories are easy to celebrate, silent victories often matter more. Britain's intelligence war began long before America entered the conflict, and its impact shaped nearly every major Allied success. At Bletchley Park, British codebreakers cracked the German Enigma machine. This was not a single moment of genius, but years of exhausting work under extreme secrecy. By reading German communications, Britain knew where U-boats would strike, when air raids were coming, and how German commanders planned their moves. These insights saved countless Allied lives. When the United States joined the war, Britain shared this intelligence advantage. American naval convoys crossed the Atlantic using routes informed by British codebreaking. American commanders benefited from information Britain had already paid for through years of trial, error, and loss. Another example is deception. Operation Bodyguard, the massive plan to mislead Germany about the D-Day landings, was largely a British creation. Fake armies, double agents, false radio traffic, and inflatable tanks convinced Hitler the invasion would come at Pas de Calais, not Normandy. This deception kept German divisions away from the real landing zones. British double agents played a crucial role. Captured German spies were turned and used to feed Berlin carefully crafted lies. This intelligence network had been built and tested years earlier. By the time American forces landed in France, the deception system was already proven and trusted by German command. British command decisions also shaped early Allied structure. Combined operations, joint commands, and amphibious assault planning were refined through British experience in earlier, costly failures. These lessons influenced how American forces planned later landings across Europe and the Pacific. Even leadership culture was affected. British officers understood coalition warfare from managing Commonwealth forces across continents. That experience helped integrate American troops rapidly into a unified command structure once the United States committed fully to the war. These contributions rarely appear in popular stories because intelligence victories leave no dramatic battlefield footage. Yet they explain why some operations succeeded against heavy odds. Battles are often decided before the first shot is fired. For American and Canadian audiences, recognizing Britain's intelligence role is not about credit stealing. It is about understanding how victory actually works. Guns matter, but information matters more. In the next part, we will focus on specific battles, commonly labeled as American triumphs, and examine what British forces were doing at the same time, often carrying equal or greater responsibility. When the full picture comes into view, the war looks less like a solo performance and more like a relay race, where Britain ran the first and some of the most famous American victories of World War II look very different when examined closely, not because the victories were false, but because British forces were often fighting just as hard, sometimes harder, at the same time. History simplified these moments. Reality was far more complex. Take the invasion of Normandy. Omaha Beach dominates memory, yet British and Canadian forces landed on Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches under relentless fire. British troops faced fortified towns, minefields, and counterattacks from elite German units. Their mission was not only to survive, but to secure the flanks that protected American advances inland. At the same time, British airborne forces dropped behind enemy lines hours before dawn. They seized bridges, blocked German reinforcements, and held positions while surrounded. These actions prevented German armor from crushing the beach landings. Without those British and Commonwealth efforts, the invasion could have stalled or failed entirely. Look east to the Battle of the Bulge. While American forces bore the shock of the German offensive, British troops played a crucial role in stabilizing the northern sector. British commanders coordinated responses that prevented the breakthrough from expanding. The battle is remembered as an American stand, but it was an Allied effort in structure and outcome. In Italy, American narratives often highlight the push north, yet British and Commonwealth troops fought continuously through terrain that favored the defender. Mountain warfare, river crossings, and urban combat drained German strength long before final breakthroughs occurred. These battles rarely make headlines, but they consumed German divisions that could not be used elsewhere. Even the liberation of Western Europe relied heavily on British logistics, ports, engineering units, and supply chains built and protected by British forces kept Allied armies moving. Victory depends on fuel, food, and ammunition as much as courage. Britain had spent years learning how to keep armies alive under fire. Why does this matter today? Because simplified stories erase effort. They turn shared sacrifice into national myths. American courage does not need exaggeration. It stands on its own. But British contributions deserve equal clarity. For American and Canadian audiences, this perspective deepens respect rather than reducing it. It shows how victory was built layer by layer. Britain absorbed early punishment, learned costly lessons, and created systems that later supported massive Allied offensives. In the next part, we will explore how British endurance shaped the post-war world. Even as public recognition faded, the battlefield ended in 1945, but the consequences of who was remembered and who was not continued for decades. Understanding that legacy completes the story of how World War II was truly fought, truly won, and truly remembered. By the time World War II ended, Britain had won the war but lost its spotlight. Victory came with exhaustion, debt, and a broken economy. Cities were damaged, rationing continued, and the empire that once funded global power was fading. Britain did not have the strength to control the story of the war it helped win. The United States, by contrast, emerged stronger than ever. Its factories were untouched. Its economy surged. American troops returned home to celebration, while British families faced years of recovery. Power shapes memory, and the nation with the loudest voice often defines the past. This shift influenced how the post-war world understood sacrifice. British losses were immense, not only in soldiers but in civilians. Bombing campaigns destroyed neighborhoods and families long before American cities felt any threat. Britain fought knowing defeat could mean occupation, not distance. As alliances formed in the Cold War, the narrative narrowed further. America became the symbol of Western strength. Britain became the loyal partner, dependable but secondary. The early years when Britain stood alone were slowly pushed aside, not out of malice, but convenience. Yet Britain's endurance changed history. By refusing to surrender, Britain gave the Allies time for American industry to mobilize, time for global coordination to form, time for resistance movements to survive. Time turned desperation into strategy. For modern viewers, especially in the United States and Canada, this perspective invites maturity. Great nations do not need simple legends. They need honest stories. Recognizing Britain's role does not shrink American achievement. It places it in context. World War II was not a sudden rescue. It was a long, brutal struggle where one nation held the line while others prepared. Britain's soldiers, pilots, sailors, and civilians carried that burden with no guarantee of relief. This series is not about rewriting history. It is about restoring what was trimmed away. When Britain fought alone, the world's future hung by a thread. When America joined, that thread became a rope. Together, the Allies pulled history back from collapse. In the final part, we will reflect on why telling the full truth matters today. Because memory shapes identity, because alliances depend on respect, and because understanding how victory truly happened prepares us to face future challenges together, without myths, without erasure, and without forgetting those who fought before the cameras arrived. History is strongest when it is complete, and World War II deserves nothing less than the full story, told clearly, fairly, and without shortcuts. The story of World War II is often told as a moment of rescue, a dramatic arrival that saved the world just in time. But history rarely works that cleanly. The war was not won in a single year, on a single beach, or by a single nation. It was won through endurance, sacrifice, and decisions made when defeat felt closer than victory. Britain's role sits at the heart of that truth. From 1939 onward, Britain fought without certainty of survival. Its skies burned during the Blitz. Its ships vanished in the Atlantic. Its soldiers fought across deserts, mountains, and seas while allies debated when, or if, they would join. That resistance kept the war alive long enough for global cooperation to form. America's entry changed the scale of the conflict. Industrial power, manpower, and momentum turned defense into offense. But those strengths landed on a battlefield already shaped by British effort. Airfields existed. Sea lanes were protected, intelligence networks were running, German forces were stretched and redirected. None of this happened by chance. For American and Canadian audiences, this understanding should feel grounded, not uncomfortable. Shared victory is stronger than solo legend. It shows how alliances succeed when nations cover each other's weaknesses and trust each other's strengths. Modern challenges still demand that lesson. No country wins alone. Cooperation begins with respect, and respect begins with honest memory. When parts of history are ignored, cooperation weakens. When the full story is known, unity grows. This series has not argued that America took credit unfairly. It has shown how storytelling, power, and time shaped public memory. Britain did not demand attention after the war. It rebuilt quietly. America stepped forward loudly. Both paths were understandable, but memory tilted as a result. Correcting that tilt does not erase American heroism. It restores British sacrifice. It honors Canadian forces who fought alongside both. It reminds us that freedom was defended long before it was celebrated. World War II was not a movie. It was a long, exhausting struggle where people fought without knowing how the story would end. Britain fought when the ending looked dark. America joined and helped bring it to light. Together, they changed history. If this series leaves one message, let it be this: victory belongs to those who hold the line before the cameras arrive, and to those who join when the fight demands more. Remembering both is not optional. It is the responsibility of anyone who benefits from the peace they created. History deserves honesty, and the men and women who fought deserve to be remembered fully, not selectively. That is how the real victory of World War II should be understood, preserved, and passed on. Even today, the way World War II is discussed reveals how memory favors simplicity over truth. Complex cooperation is harder to explain than heroic dominance. Yet the real strength of the Allied victory was not speed or spectacle. It was patience, coordination, and survival under pressure. Britain's early resistance forced Germany into a long war it never planned to fight. Hitler expected quick collapse, not years of defiance. British survival reshaped German strategy, drained resources, and delayed operations elsewhere. Every month Britain remained standing reduced Germany's chances of winning decisively. This delay mattered deeply. While Britain fought, the United States transformed its economy into a war engine. Factories expanded, soldiers trained, ships rolled off assembly lines. That transformation required time, and time was purchased by British endurance. Canada's role also deserves recognition. Canadian forces fought alongside Britain from the beginning. Long before American entry, Canadian sailors guarded Atlantic convoys. Canadian troops fought in Italy and Normandy. Their contribution bridges the British and American experiences, reminding us this was never a two-nation effort alone. Public memory often focuses on who finished the race, not who ran the first miles. But without those early miles, there is no finish line. Britain absorbed the shock so others could prepare. That reality does not weaken the final victory. It explains it. Understanding this fuller picture helps modern audiences resist distorted comparisons. War is not a competition for credit. It is a chain of responsibility. When one link breaks, the entire effort collapses. Britain refused to let that chain fail when it was most fragile. For American and Canadian viewers, this story is empowering. It shows that alliances are strongest when partners trust each other with hard truths. The United States did not inherit a ready-made victory. It joined a struggle already shaped by sacrifice. The lesson extends beyond history. Future conflicts will also depend on who stands early, who prepares patiently, and who joins when readiness meets necessity. Remembering Britain's role reinforces that preparation and persistence matter as much as strength. This series challenges easy narratives because easy narratives are rarely accurate. World War II was messy, uneven, and uncertain. That uncertainty makes the victory more meaningful, not less. In the next part, we will examine how public memorials, anniversaries, and media coverage continue to shape what younger generations believe about the war. Memory is not fixed. It is taught, repeated, and reinforced. Understanding how it evolves helps ensure that those who carried the burden early are never forgotten again. How nations remember war is shaped not only by facts, but by repetition. Anniversaries, documentaries, and ceremonies slowly teach audiences what to value. Over time, emphasis becomes belief. In the case of World War II, remembrance steadily narrowed around a few iconic moments. D-Day anniversaries dominate global coverage. Rows of white crosses, speeches by presidents, and sweeping aerial shots reinforce a powerful image. These moments matter deeply, but they represent one phase of a much longer struggle. When remembrance begins in 1944, everything before it fades into shadow. British memorial culture developed differently. Britain remembered endurance rather than triumph. The Blitz, rationing, blackouts, and loss shaped national memory more than celebration. These experiences were harder to export globally. They lacked a single victorious image, yet defined survival itself. Media reinforced the imbalance. Television documentaries favored footage-heavy campaigns. American archives were larger, better preserved, and aggressively shared. British material often focused on preparation, intelligence, or aftermath. Subjects less visually dramatic, but equally decisive. As generations passed, distance increased. Younger audiences encountered the war mainly through entertainment. Films, games, and simplified lessons filled gaps left by fading witnesses. The result was not intentional erasure, but gradual distortion. Public memorials reflect this shift. Museums highlight turning points, not holding actions. Yet holding actions decide wars. Britain's refusal to collapse forced Germany to fight a prolonged conflict it could not sustain. That reality deserves equal space in public memory. For American and Canadian audiences, expanding remembrance does not dilute honor. It multiplies it. Understanding Britain's role highlights how alliances function under pressure. It shows that leadership sometimes means standing alone, absorbing losses, and waiting without certainty. Canada's remembrance bridges the gap. Canadian ceremonies acknowledge early Atlantic losses and later European victories. This balanced memory offers a model for how shared sacrifice can be honored without competition. Why does this matter now? Because memory shapes values. When history becomes too simple, future decisions follow the same path. Real security depends on patience, preparation, and partnerships built before crisis peaks. World War II teaches that lesson clearly. Britain stood first. America joined decisively. Canada supported steadily. Each role mattered at different moments. Removing one weakens understanding of them all. In the final part of this series, we will draw these threads together and answer a central question. Why does restoring Britain's role matter beyond history books? The answer connects past alliances to future challenges. It explains why truth, not myth, remains the strongest foundation for cooperation. Remembering fully is not about the past alone. Restoring Britain's role in World War II is not about changing who won. It is about understanding how victory was built. History becomes dangerous when it turns complex. Cooperation into a single storyline. The Allied victory worked because different nations carried different burdens at different times. Britain's burden came first. From 1939 onward, Britain fought without certainty of survival. Its leaders made decisions knowing failure could mean invasion, occupation, and the collapse of resistance across Europe. That willingness to fight early changed the entire direction of the war. By holding on, Britain created space. Space for American industry to mobilize. Space for Canada to expand its military role. Space for intelligence networks to grow. Space for strategy to replace desperation. That space is rarely visible in films or speeches, yet it was the foundation. Everything else stood on. When America entered the war, It did so with unmatched energy and scale. That contribution deserves recognition and respect. But it entered a war already shaped by years of British resistance. Ignoring that sequence turns cooperation into confusion for American and Canadian audiences. Recognizing this order strengthens national confidence. Strong nations do not fear context. They learn from it. Understanding Britain's early role reminds us that leadership sometimes means standing alone, and sometimes means arriving prepared to support those already fighting. This lesson matters today. Global challenges rarely announce themselves at the perfect moment. They test alliances unevenly. Some nations absorb the first shot. Others arrive later with resources and strength. Success depends on honoring both roles, not ranking them. World War II shows what happens when that balance works. Britain refused to surrender. America refused to stay out forever. Canada committed steadily. Together, they formed a coalition strong enough to defeat a ruthless enemy. This series has not asked viewers to replace one hero with another. It has asked them to widen the frame. When the frame widens, the story becomes richer, more honest, and more useful. History is not a contest for credit. It is a record of choices. Britain chose resistance when collapse seemed likely. America chose commitment when isolation felt safer. Canada chose partnership from the beginning. Those choices combined to shape the modern world. Remembering Britain's role does not reduce American pride. It deepens it. It reminds us that victory is strongest when it is shared, and memory is strongest when it is complete. World War II deserves that completeness. Not for nostalgia, not for argument, but for understanding. Because the future will ask similar questions of courage, timing, and cooperation. The war was won by many hands, at different moments, under different pressures. Britain did the fighting when the world needed someone to stand first. Others joined, and together